Here with Simon Mäntylä and a CrossFit competitor from Sweden, and of course joined by Daniel Paulson, also from Sweden. So again, the second podcast now that I'm outnumbered 2 Swedes to 1. So let's see where this goes. This is going to be a conversation, all things CrossFit, and we're going to have, tying and breathing and recovery and sleep. And I'm not going to let Daniel, but Daniel is kicking off. So Daniel.
Yeah. Well, welcome, Simon, first of all.
Thank you.
We're going to talk a little bit about, try to be as specific as possible what you can do before a training workout or competition, during competition and after competition, and then also try to weave that into I know you're in the middle of the CrossFit Open, which is a multi-month competition if you stay in it. So it's also mentally draining, but so it's both the physical aspects and the mental aspects. But I'm thinking before we get into that, can you tell us a little bit about how you got into CrossFit and when that happened?
For sure. So started CrossFit back in 2012. I got introduced to it by a couple of friends of mine who worked out at the gym that I was working at. So I was actually a personal trainer, and I was working as a sports performance coach for the city's basketball and hockey team, and was doing the typical gym routine mixed with some running, with some group fitness and a bunch of other recreational sports and whatnot, but didn't really have a competitive outlet for all my physical activity, so to speak. So they said, here's the sport. It's basically you compete in pure physical performance in these different tests or workouts, and it's really tough, and you lift weights and you run, so it'll be perfect for you. So I tried it out and a couple times, and after a while I just figured this is pretty fun. So I signed up for a competition, did pretty well, and then I figured, well, I could make something out of this if I just put everything into it and really dedicate myself to it. And
so did you start competition pretty early, like after a year or two, or was it later on when you realized you were pretty good?
It was just like after a couple of months, I actually competed.
Okay.
So, and
no
I
need
ended
to wait.
Yeah, no need to wait. And I ended up winning my first competition, and that was like a smaller local one. So, and I ended up placing 4th in like the national competition that year. So top 5 in Sweden at that time, or even right now, is pretty tough because we have quite a competitive field of athletes. So that's when I figured I got some talent in this and I can pursue this.
Yeah. So how by the way, how often do you train in a normal week? What's a normal week for you?
Normal week for me would be 2 sessions a day, 5 days a week. And then once a week I have just only 1 session, but it's more of a longer duration, steady state aerobic piece, just pure running, biking, or a mix of the two, or multiple activities. I prefer trail running, just to get outside of the gym and just move my body through the terrain in different like angles and uphill, downhill, just to have a challenge. So that's a typical training week for me. So roughly 11 sessions. So
that is pretty tough. And you follow obviously then your own program. Do you have a group of people that you train with, or are you by yourself?
I usually train with my girlfriend. So, and she's a competitor as well. So we are, well, both partners in life and partners in training partners. So, and she's pushing me really hard, and I also
That's what
have
girlfriends usually do, Simon.
Yeah, in all aspects of life. And but then
I can say that because I have my wife sitting here beside me. She's keeping calm anyway. That's the main thing.
That's great. Other than that, we have a great training group here. So we have 2 other CrossFit Games athletes, and then we have 1 Masters athlete as well. So she's competing in the 65-year-old category, and she's currently ranked one of the top athletes in her age category. So it's really great environment to train with. So
yeah. So
Daniel.
if we talk a little bit about what you can do before a workout, because it's I guess a little bit different. We can get into competition later on, but what do you do when you warm up, for example? Have you ever used any breathing techniques, or you just kind of go in and lift, or use rubber bands, or what exactly do you do before a normal training?
On a normal training day, I typically do the conditioning or aerobic stuff in the morning or in the before lunch, and that usually incorporates like a pretty long build-up of aerobic work, so 20 to 30 minutes, gradually building intensity until your system is ready to go, basically.
Yep.
And then there might be pure interval style training, like your typical 4 minutes on, 2 minutes off, or 30 seconds off, 30 seconds off, pure aerobic high intensity work. Or there might be a CrossFit workout, but the preparation is typically the same. So it's a general warm up just to get the system going, and then you start to add in more specific movements and weights or whatever the workout requires. You add in more specific preparation, and then you build intensity, so you're almost at that intensity that you're gonna train or compete at before you go. And of course, like finding the correct breathing patterns is a part of that. So you don't want to be hyperventilating, or you want to have your system prepared for what's to come.
Yep.
And so yeah.
Do you do the same type of once a competition? Because I guess CrossFit is no different than other sport, where you become a little bit anxious before competition. It's also the ritual of just warming up. Do you do this? Do you have the same routine for competition every time, or do you kind of mix it up, or anything specific there?
It pretty much depends on what the workout or the event is going to be on the competition day. So of course, CrossFit it incorporates everything. So there's little necessity to do a really long aerobic workout warm up for a max lift. Yep. Whereas if we're gonna do something really high intensity in a time domain of 5 to 15 minutes, it's super important.
Yep.
Otherwise, you'll just redline, hit a wall, and you'll crash and burn, basically.
Yeah.
So it always depends on the tests, but I know how to prepare for it, because like you said, I do the same routine in training as when I compete. Yeah. So I know what my body works with and what doesn't work. So I can recognize the feeling, and also if I'm more anxious or nervous, I can take that into account when something feels off, or it feels strange, or my heart rate is higher than usual because of the stress. Then I know that, so I can find some sense in all of it.
Yeah, because very interesting you said that, because you want to have some sort of stress, but you don't want to overdo it so you become nervous and too anxious, because then it's a problem. But the difference between CrossFit and most sports is that you go into a competition, it might be deadlift and rope climbing, and the next competition, like an hour later, might be power cleans and running. So your body will respond in different ways. So maybe that adds to the anxiousness and nervousness, because you never really know how your body will react exactly, because you don't go in and do the exact same workout every time. Then kind of after 2 minutes I will respond like this. How do you respond? I mean, how do you deal with that uncertainty, especially in competition? Do you just try to focus on those specific exercises before, and then try to just go into it, or do you have anything specific there?
It also depends on if we know the events or the movements beforehand, or if we get to know them at the competition day. So let's build a scenario that we just get to know them right beforehand, because it's way trickier. So then you kind of have I've done it for long enough, so I kind of have an idea what will be the limiting factor of the event. It might be the barbell movement, or the running, or what pace should I hold, what's my maximum or minimum pace to stay with the field. And of course, it's a race. So you look at your competitors and you look within yourself, and you kind of play off what's going on in the game, so to speak. But in the open, it's different, because then it's just you. So you can just go by your own feeling. So you kind of recognize those signals when you know you're working too hard for too long. Kind of your breathing gets out of control. It goes from being down in your stomach to really up into your chest. You stop using your nose, you're just breathing through your mouth, and you get that like stress reaction, the typical flight instead of fight reaction, so to speak. So then you know, after a while, you get experienced enough to know when to dial back, when to push, sort of. So in the beginning, as a beginner, you don't really know. So I think it's important to have both aspects of that in your training, that sometimes you go into the event without a plan just to learn, and then sometimes go in with a plan that might be a little bit conservative, and then you can gain experience from both of those strategies and find the perfect strategy for you.
Okay, Daniel, I'd like to step in. I think this is fascinating, because I'm not familiar with CrossFit, so I'm just listening away to you, Simon. Many different power systems involved, and I'm just thinking about ways that you could not you could really, but somebody who's in CrossFit could apply different techniques. So for example, in terms of improving the biomechanics of breathing for weightlifting, you also spoke about when somebody gets gassed out, that their breathing goes from the diaphragm up to the chest and they start mouth breathing. And tools then that one could bring into everyday life, including measuring breath hold time during rest in their everyday. And that will give some feedback of their functional breathing during rest, which determines their breathing during physical exercise. And another thing that just came into mind was, say, for example, you do a high intensity exercise, which is about 30 seconds or 1 minute, and then you've got to rest for 30 seconds before you do something else. That we would do, say, I'll give you an example of one study that was in rugby union players in Australia. They had 21 individuals, divided them into two groups, and over 4 weeks, both groups did 40-meter sprints, but one group did the 40-meter sprint on a breath hold, holding their breath, with a departure every 30 seconds, and the other group did a 40-meter sprint with normal breathing with a departure every 30 seconds. And at the end of 4 weeks, the repeated sprint ability in the breath hold group increased from 9 reps to 14.8 before exhaustion, and the normal breathing group didn't. So little tools and little tricks. And also, you were saying about your heart rate, because one can purposely slow down breathing to stimulate the vagus nerve to secrete the neurotransmitter acetylcholine. And this will cause a slowing of the heart rate. And this is known since 1921. So it's fascinating stuff, both Simon and Daniel, in terms of breaking it down and asking where could techniques be added here to get those gains. And bearing in mind, that study I spoke about, they were highly trained professional rugby union players. And even to get a gain of, from 9 reps to 14.8 before exhaustion, there's something in it. Yeah. So, yeah. Can I just ask, when you're doing your training, say to prepare for the high intensity, do you do it with your mouth closed?
Not purposely, but I don't bring in more air than necessary. And I've actually played around. A few years ago, I actually did some of my steady state work where I purposely had to breathe through my nose through parts of the run, let's say the run, just to be able to know that I control the intensity, so I'm not going too fast in a low intensity training session. So that would be a easy, simple way to know that you're keeping the correct intensity. Just like the cue that you should be able to hold a conversation without being interrupted or having to interrupt yourself.
Yeah.
So that, together with, looking at that I'm in the correct zone on my heart rate monitor, is definitely useful tools that I've used through my career. So yeah.
What's tricky in CrossFit is the fact that it's fairly easy to do on a rowing machine or a bike, but once you start doing the barbells or climbing ropes or a D-ball or whatever, it's very tricky to know the exact speed. But when you have the RPMs or the calories, you can follow it and you can have the same exactly up to that level where you start mouth breathing, and you can dial it up and down. Do you use that a little bit on the rowing machine or the assault bike, so you know kind of, okay, if I go over a certain amount of calories per minute, I'm going to start mouth breathing?
Yeah, it's also with the rower or any erg, you kind of have the certain frequency that you work at, let's say 22 strokes per minute. So you want to time that with your breathing, because part of the, let's say the row, you want to hold your breath to make sure you get good power transfer through the legs into the hips, into the handle when you finish the pull, and then you let go and you breathe again. So in those movements, it comes kind of natural. And after a while, once you go too fast, that's when your breathing is mistiming your frequency or your RPMs on the erg. So that's, for a beginner, it doesn't really make sense. But for me, that could be a really big difference in how much wattage I can produce or how much speed I can hold to be able to get the maximum, out of my body.
Can I ask, Simon?
Yeah.
So when you're breathing, when the respiratory rate is increasing much quicker than the reps that you're doing during the exercise, then you know that there's an issue.
Yeah, exactly. On a erg or on a stationary rower or a ski erg or an assault bike, even for running, if you run and you're not timing, kind of your inhalation and exhalation with the number of steps that you're taking, it's kind of like your chest is kind of collapsing. You're losing posture, and then you're losing efficiency in your run. So it's sort of the same for all the conditioning machines, so to speak. So you want to have a correct breathing pattern to get the most out of the movement. And the same goes for the lifting movements, because let's say I'm going to do a set of 15 with 140 kilos within a workout. I need to have a certain time where I hold my breath in order to create stability for my spine and my core. So that's also something that's really important to practice in training, to know what my breathing pattern is, because if I exhale in the wrong part of the movement, I'll jeopardize my technique, and there goes my efficiency and also the safety of the lift itself, because the weight will be put on your spine instead of your posterior chain. So super important.
Yeah. Do you ever let your breathing lead the way? So in a especially in competition, when early on maybe you're not that tired, so if between exercises maybe you breathe once or twice, but as you get more and more deeper in that workout, you may need 4 to 5 breaths in between exercises, versus looking at the clock and knowing that you have to beat a certain time. Talking about how important form is. Do you ever kind of let breathing dictate when you're ready for a lift versus the clock?
It all depends on how much time I have.
Yeah.
so if it's in training, I wouldn't let the clock dictate anything really, because then how you execute perfect practice is more important than just getting a certain score in training. When it comes to competition, hopefully you have the correct strategy so you get the most out of your body, so you get the best performance possible. If you misstep, of course there's room for error because it's competition, but like at the CrossFit Games you have multiple events, like 15 events in the range of 3 to 4 days. So you only have a limited amount of those lifelines, so to speak. Otherwise you'll come to the final day of competition and you'd be smashed, you'd be drained. So you got to stay below that red line for as much time as possible. You can't fire on all cylinders and just gamble all the time. You got to stay within control. So
Now you're at a very high level, so you kind of know where that red line is. But I still say that a CrossFit is much more difficult than most sports because sometimes you do different exercises with various times or intensities. So you may hit the wall much easier than if you're just a runner, because then you know your pace should be a specific, time per kilometer or whatever. But here you may do a unique set of rope climbs and deadlift and handstand push-ups, and you may hit the wall. Just go, and if you hit the wall in CrossFit, it's extremely difficult to come back down. Does that ever happen to you when you in work? I mean, in training, but more so in competition. And how do you handle it?
I mean, there's a time and place for everything. So sometimes I believe you have to, get hit to know how it feels to get punched in the face, to know how to handle it. If you're always playing it on the safe side, you're not exploring new ground, or you're not gaining more experience. You just know what you know, basically. So there's definitely a time and place for it in training, where we purposely create workouts or scenarios where you are getting tested or you are getting pushed over the line. And then we can see how long does it take for me to come back down? What strategies do I apply? How is my thought process and mindset? How am I handling the stress of, I basically failed now. When am I ready to get back and attack again, so to speak?
But I wonder what's playing a role in hitting the wall. Is part of it due to an accumulation of hydrogen ions?
Yeah, probably. Yeah. And also like local muscular fatigue, contractibility, like your grip. Let's say you're climbing a rope and you're getting fatigue in your hands, but you might feel fine if you look at the big picture.
Which in turn is going to be influenced by blood flow and oxygen delivery, muscle fatigue. So this is, in terms of doing breath holds, and more often than not, they are not used, but the last 10 years, there's a little bit more coming out about it. So I'll give you one example, Simon, and this would be an interesting one for you just to try out and see. You take a normal breath in and out through your nose, pinch your nose and hold, start walking, go into a jog, fast jog, into a sprint. Keep pushing until you feel a fairly strong air hunger, and then let go with minimal breathing for 6 breaths. Wait 45 seconds and do it again, and do about 5 reps. And that will push your body into an anaerobic state that is much stronger than any sprint. So normally, for example, if you were doing a sprint with either mouth closed or mouth open, your blood oxygen saturation will drop down into the low 90s, mild hypoxia. But if you do it with a breath hold, especially after an exhalation, you'll drop it into the mid 80s. And this will force then the buffering capacity inside the muscle compartment to improve, which will delay lactic acid and fatigue. So I think you could delay hitting the wall by imposing breath holds in training. And also there is a psychological thing, because that intense feeling of breathlessness, it's not a nice feeling. But when you do a breath hold during a sprint, you're deliberately generating a very strong feeling of breathlessness. And you may be training the brain that the body can push it harder and faster without overdoing it. Because if, for example, there's a few things going on. Diaphragm fatigue is common with 50% of athletes. And if the diaphragm breathing muscle fatigues, blood is stolen from the legs. So the legs will give out, they go jelly. Nose breathing and breath holding will add an extra load onto the diaphragm. But then functional breathing during every day, which can be measured by breath hold time, will also help to assess or to give you an indicator of functional breathing in terms of the biomechanics. So it would be, Simon or Daniel, it's a very interesting one to look at a CrossFit routine and just to superimpose different things.
You get this spleen contraction, which releases blood cells. You get a two-way effect. First, you get the 10-minute effect, short term, which is good for workouts. And you can look at it via this pulse oximeter. I don't know if you use that ever, Simon, but then you can see your blood oxygen level go down, and so you can control it. And it's basically, I guess, if you drop it down to 80 or 85, it's like what 5,000 or 6,000 meters. So it's simulated
it's
high
severe
altitude.
hypoxia. Yeah.
Yeah.
And a lot
then
of this
you get
information
repo.
we have is coming from Sweden.
Yeah.
From it's research that has come out from Sweden in the last 10, 15 years. One researcher is prolific. Her name is Erika Shagate, but there's also another guy, Matt Richardson, and they've produced great stuff. And I suppose the background was that they were intrigued with our ancient tribes, or not ancient tribes, but tribes that would be, for example, in the Amazon doing long breath holds. And they were able to hold their breath for longer than the physiological medical norms. And she was intrigued, how could these people do it? How can the AMA divers hold their breath for so long? And she started looking at, and as Daniel explained, we have a spleen underneath the diaphragm, and it's our blood bank, and it contains 8% of red blood cells, and 80% is hematocrit, which carries oxygen, so oxygen carrying red blood cells. And when you do 5 strong breath holds, the spleen releases red blood cells into circulation. So coming back to muscle fatigue, if an athlete had greater oxygen carrying capacity, so there's greater oxygen delivery to the muscles, they're staying aerobically for longer, which nasal breathing is doing, but also CO2 tolerance is doing. Yeah, it's just as fascinating to Simon. It really is.
Well, Simon, what do you do then for recovery? Like once you've done like the workouts, what's your main focus after training specifically, but also competition?
Again, it depends on the event, but typically it's some sort of cool down routine where I try to flush the system of waste products, basically. So it's like an easy aerobic work on a bike typically, or an easy jog. And I might even incorporate some sled pushes or sled drags in order to activate my type 2 fibers, just to cover the whole spectrum depending on how heavy the loading was and stuff. And I really feel that like getting a little bit of a muscle burn, not like a lactic feeling where you kind of affect your aerobic system, but more of a sort of isometric feel, like a kind of also helps getting blood flow to the muscles, and enhances recovery. So definitely like straight after, just getting movement or keeping the movement going, but at a much lower intensity, helps a lot. And then post-workout nutrition, getting your carbohydrates and your proteins in pretty quickly, especially if you plan on doing another training session within a couple hours. Or if you're in a competition, even more important, you have an event within maybe 1 or 2 hours. There's not that much time to eat, so you kind of have to eat when you can. So that's basically the routine. And then might be do some stretching or whatnot, maybe some foam rolling, or if you have a physical therapist there to take care of if you have something nagging. And in training, I also implement saunas and hot, cold, a little bit the contrast. I find that beneficial. And I know there's a lot of studies like saying that it's good for you or bad for you.
Yep.
I just, the sense of recovery plays a big part for me. So I usually use that before a rest day. So let's say it's my last session on a Saturday, then I'll have a longer sauna session with contrast showers or ice baths in between, because I just feel more rejuvenated afterwards, leaving the training week. Yeah.
It's tricky. I know that doing saunas, there's some research saying that if you do it in conjunction with training, actually builds your muscle, because the net protein effect you get from it versus cold. If you're a power lifter, they say it's bad for you, versus if you're a runner, if you do it right afterwards, within the next 2 hours, it's good. So it's kind of conflicting messages, but I think your mental aspect, it's great. It feels great. So if it feels great, there is at least something that is good for you, I think, regardless of the physical aspects.
Yeah, and I also think like the argument that the cold inhibits hypertrophy. I'm not super interested in hypertrophy. I'd rather stay lighter and be just as strong or perform just as well, because I don't need more weight to carry. That's just another, it doesn't benefit me at all. So, and
then between training, like breathing is very related to sleep. and what you do during the day. And if you train as much as you do with that intensity, how important is sleep? And do you have anything specific about sleep? You have to get a certain amount of hours, or you go to a certain time, or anything, or you focus on sleep a lot, or how does that work for you?
Yeah, that's like the cornerstone for recovery along with nutrition. So my goal is to sleep roughly 9 hours every night. So I typically go to bed at like 10 p.m. and I just wake up naturally by myself around usually 6 a.m. But then I force myself sort of to stay in bed for another hour or so.
Yeah.
But I'm still, relaxed. And then between training sessions, not every day, but maybe 5 days a week, I take a short nap of like 20 to 40 minutes, depending on how tired I am. And I shut the blinds and I put some like white noise on, sort of like birds or rain or whatever, just the sound to occupy my mind so I don't think about things.
Yep.
And then I actually lie on my back and I have my hands on my stomach, so I try to expand them, like breathing really low. So I lift my hands with my breathing. And if I fall asleep, that's fine. But at least if I don't mind. And I also have this weighted blanket, so it's heavy on me, so I kind of have to lift it every time I breathe, and stuff
it's
like
good,
that.
by the way.
Yeah.
Because it's slowing down your breathing, which is calming, and also it's kind of amazing during sleep. If one has a fast respiratory rate during sleep, the brain thinks that the body is under threat, and the brain will wake up. So if somebody, say for example, was in too warm a bed, and the additional heat that the respiratory rate was speeding up, that person is likely to wake up. So they could wake up at 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, and then they have sleep disruptions and they wake up feeling tired. But mouth breathing does it also. So the weighted blanket is actually a good idea. We use something similar using a belt just to slow down breathing. And I'm just thinking that CrossFit guys, pretty strong. They're going to be bigger guys and likely to have a neck circumference greater than 16 inches. So there could be a risk of sleep disorder breathing there, which would in turn affect performance. It would be very interesting to see how many of them are breathing through their mouth during sleep, because one should never wake up with a dry mouth in the morning. And especially when we have a larger neck circumference, we're more prone to stopping of the breath or snoring. And that's where breathing can come in as well, because if one is snoring or stopping breathing, and that is absolutely going to affect performance, because it's taking one out of deep sleep. And for deep sleep, nose breathing, the slow breathing that you talked about using the blanket, and even abdominal breathing, because when you breathe using the diaphragm, it increases lung volume and the throat is stiffer and less likely to collapse. So for down regulation, we do a scenario that's 15 minutes of breathing light and really slow breathing before sleep to make people feel groggy, and they've increased watery saliva in the mouth so that they know it's stimulating the vagus nerve. Because I think, Simon, human nature is, if there was a competition the following day, it's going to be running through the mind. And if the mind is overly anxious during sleep, well, we're not going to sleep. And as a result, then it's going to incur poorer quality sleep and less ability to focus and concentrate the following morning. There's a lot of things going on. It's not just physical exercise and training, but sleep is a big part of it. I would agree. I think it's huge. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
How much, Simon, how you seem to take extremely good care of yourself with everything, but so we've mostly been talking about the physical aspects. How much is these daily rituals are important for your mind to be mentally prepared for every day, be mentally prepared for competition, to do all these things? That, like, how much is it, like, are the mental aspects of doing all this to make sure you're ready for our competition, ready for workouts day by day?
I think it's important if you feel that it's important, that like if you feel that it's giving you benefits. And I for sure feel that if I disrupt my daily schedule or my routine, I can feel my performance decline the next day. So therefore it gives me a mental boost when I know that I've done everything that I can to prepare, because I know I couldn't do more. So I can find a sense of peace in that, like I've had proper nutrition, I have proper sleep, I did a good warm up, I did everything I could. So now it's just up to going in and execute. It's no more that I could have done to be as good as I can be, so to speak.
Yeah.
So it definitely has something to do with your mental attitude. If you know in the back of your mind that you have been slacking off a little bit here, you maybe stayed up a few extra nights or whatever, that is something that's going to come haunt you if you make a mistake. It's easy to blame that to the mistake, whereas if you've done everything perfectly, well, then it's just a mistake, and then it's something that you have maybe not have control over. It might have been something that broke or whatever, but if you do everything that you have control over, it doesn't really matter what your competitors are doing or what happens in the playoff field. That's just the nature of sport, so to speak.
I think that is important, because a lot of people can be anxious not over the things that they have control over, but the things that they have no control over.
Yeah.
And that can affect performance. Do you bring your attention into your body when you're doing physical exercise? Like you've mentioned a few times, Simon, that you listen to your body, or it's that you bring your attention into the body, and your body is telling you if a particular routine has been helpful or not. Do you have a habit of, if you were lifting weights, that you're lifting with every cell of your body? If you're doing your exercise, you're running with every cell of your body. Do you do anything, or is that just something that is second nature to you? Did you train to do that, or do you do it?
I think it's a little bit of both. Now it's kind of second nature to me because I've done it for so long. So it's imprinted in my nervous system, so to speak. So when I'm supposed to do a really heavy weight, I don't really have to think about using every ounce of energy that I have. It's just automatic. Whereas as a beginner, you have to kind of teach yourself that. The first time you're lifting a weight, first of all, you don't know how to do it properly, but you also don't know how to really exert yourself before you've done it, and you push the boundary of exertion, and then you can. You discover more and more what you're capable of. So you kind of find that threshold of what true hard work really is. It takes a few years to get there. So the first time you think you're working hard, it's actually not that hard at all once you've climbed the ladder for a few years, so to speak.
So it's basically adaptation. It takes
it's adaptation, but it's also an adaptation of like attitude. So
your mind actually have to adapt to the training loads as well. It's not just physical. You have to get used to training twice a day. It's you have to get used to it. It may take a few years, so it's tough. How much do you think in CrossFit is in the top guys is the mental aspect versus the physical? Does that play any role at all? Like in competition, looking at the other person and getting a little bit, anxious that you're not going to beat that guy, or is it just physical?
It's a lot of physical, I think, in the early stages of the competition, and the further you get into a weekend, the more and more the mental aspect plays a big part of it. So, for example, you mentioned the CrossFit Open in the beginning. That can be stressful in a way because it's a long time, and you can't really see your competitors, and you're doing one workout every week, which is a all-out effort. So you might be a little bit anxious of the pain that you're going to implement on yourself, so to speak. Whereas if it's a competition weekend, which we just went through, like the quarterfinals, where you have, which is the next stage of the competitive season, where you have multiple events over 3 days. The first day you might feel fine, but the second day you all of a sudden you have all this fatigue and you have soreness, and you also have the leaderboard. You might not be in a qualifying spot, so you have the stress of, okay, I really have to perform, but my body is not feeling ready to perform, so to speak. So I think that's when your body is not what it's used to be, and you're not used to it. That's when your mind starts to play games with you. And the further you get into that, the more people tend to drop off, so to speak. Like you could see their performance decline over a weekend. They might be really good when they do one workout a week in their home gym with their own coach, with their everything. But as soon as they get taken out of their regular environments and they have to do multiple workouts at a designated time, they can't maybe sleep in their own bed. It's something completely different. So
it's I guess it's an accumulation of stress. If you're used to competition, used to travel, used to different environments, you kind of multi-day events, having multi-events during a day, I guess most people get more used to it the more you do it. But it's difficult in CrossFit.
You get better at pacing your competitive energy as well.
I mean, I know from people that I know that the mental load ahead of CrossFit Open and competition is enormous. Like, even though the workouts may not have been that much tougher than any other, training session, they're mentally completely drained after a weekend, completely. And, it takes weeks or even months to get back on. But if you do it on a regular basis, I think the mental aspect gets a little bit easier because it's so taxing on the system in CrossFit that it's difficult to compete every weekend, like in some sports. So you're not as used to that competition as in football or tennis, because you can compete on a weekly basis. Does that have any impact, do you think, that you, like the Open, once a year, it's a big thing? Do you think that impacts some people?
I definitely think it does, because it goes through all stages, I think. So as a beginner, you're nervous because it might be your first or second time, and you started to dedicate all this time, and you want to see some sort of results, and you put this pressure on yourself. Someone might have told you that you're pretty good at this, and then all of a sudden you have these expectations to live up to. And then in later stages, you might have a few sponsorships, or you have other external things that might be pressure, or you have higher expectations of yourself. Like, last year I did this result, this year I want to do a better result. So I definitely think that anxiousness plays a huge part in the CrossFit Open in particular. But after a while, like, I've come to the stage in my career where I don't really, I see the Open and all of this as more of a means to an end. So I'm not too anxious about it. I might be a little bit anxious because you don't want to embarrass yourself, so to speak. You still want to perform, you still want to do good, but I don't purposely go into the competition or the qualifying stages of the competitive season to have a particular placing. So the chips will fall wherever they fall, as long as I qualify for the World Championships. That's the end goal. So
you're focusing on the process and not necessarily on the outcome. It would seem sure. You're really there giving it your best at this particular time, and having some trust, and also knowing that muscle memory has stored all of that training that you've done all over the years and all of your experiences over the years, that we need to get the critical mind aside and to let muscle memory kick in. And I think that's really, really important. But I can imagine that's pretty tough for new beginners to CrossFit, because they won't have the comfort or the trust that you have developed over the years. Did you find it's something that gets easier in time? But if we had, say, somebody who was new to CrossFit and was competing at a decent level, what would you think would be the best approach?
So it's pretty different for me. So I have certain physical attributes that a beginner might not have yet. So I can keep a pretty heavy training load, even though I do the Open, or even if I do the quarterfinals. I don't necessarily have to taper or be super rested in order to perform. decently well. So as for a beginner, if you're looking to advance or you have a certain result in mind, then you have to treat these early stages as maybe your last stages, and then everything else will become a bonus, and the next year you can build on that. So you sort of, after 1 or 2 or 3 years, you're sort of building yourself towards the later stages of the competitive season, because it's like the biggest sporting event in the world in terms of participants.
Wow.
It's like hundreds of thousands of people that quote unquote staying in your way. They're in your way to get to your goal, and so you have to give yourself the best possible preparation, so to speak. You have to. You literally can't train like I do through the CrossFit Open. You have to treat every single weekend as a really important competition, and you have to taper, and you have to prepare, and you have to dial in your nutrition really well, and your sleep and everything, in order to give your best effort, so to speak.
That's cool. That's cool.
I have one final question to you, Simon. It's CrossFit. The progression the last 10 years has been enormous in terms of the workouts are just going faster, the weights people are lifting are increasing higher, even for women as well. Where do you see the next frontier? Do you think will it just keep on going? Do you think it's the whole package with better recovery? Do you think breathing has a role to play, or is it just getting more focused on the technique? Or is it just like an accumulation of all these efforts that will just get better and better by the year? So if you say 10 years in the future, will results be much better than today?
I think they might be, of course they'll be better. Like every sport is progressing. You never thought like track and field would keep, getting better and better, but they are, with better equipment, better training methods. You train smarter and you plan better, and science discovers new ways to create better training adaptation and stimulus and everything. So for sure it's gonna evolve gradually. I don't think there's gonna be this big jump that just like it has been in the past 10 years. I think we kind of hit sort of like a plateau, which is gonna gradually increase now over the coming years. And yeah, so that's just what I think. So people are gonna get smarter, they're gonna train, they're gonna look at other sports to find and look into the sports science part of it. Now it's been more like a guessing game for a lot of people. To I think a lot of coaches and athletes, they're training too similar to what they're competing in. So it's a lot of it's just too specific. So they're doing CrossFit workouts on a daily, they're doing heavy weightlifting on a daily. Whereas if you look at a gymnast or a weightlifter, a gymnast does not go into the training hall and does his routine every day. Like he breaks it down and he stays in the training hall for 3 or 4 hours doing, strength work, core work, mobility work. And I think CrossFit is kind of getting to that point where you start to break down all these physical attributes and train them more separately in the off season, and then adding in more specific training as you get closer to the important competition, so to speak. So yeah, that's just my.
It's almost like the story was, I think it's Team Sky B or the British cycling, that they were going nowhere for many years, and they brought in this consultant, and this consultant says, I want to get 0.5% gain here, and 0.5% gain here, 0.5% gain here, 0.5% gain here, little incremental gains across many fields. And that's what got them to winning championships again. Breathing is one of those gains. And the only reason that I'm saying this is I've been 20 years in this field. Daniel has been in it for a while. And looking at the one thing in terms of the respiratory system and improving it, making breathing more efficient, tapping into ways to upregulate, downregulate, recover, improve sleep, the mental focus and concentration. And it's going to be interesting just going forward, Simon. So if CrossFit has plateaued, now there's an opportunity for athletes to bring something in that they haven't been using here too. And I think there's a good fit, just even based on the conversation that we've had today. So it's very interesting. It's great stuff.
Yeah, like you said, Patrick, and like you said, Simon, you do different types of workouts. But one thing is, you always have your breathing with you. So regardless if you try to improve in CrossFit, you do swimming, you have your breathing, or if you do some gymnast workouts to improve your that aspect. So I think breathing will play some sort of role moving forward as well, because it's always with you, and that most people can improve that breathing efficiency. So great answer, Simon. I have asked most of the question I wanted to ask. I'm conscious about the time here. So anything else from you, Patrick?
No, I'm good. I enjoyed the conversation, Simon. Thanks very much. I'm a big fan of Sweden. I stayed there at Uppsala University in 1994-95. I loved it. So it's all good. So nice to talk with you.
Yeah, likewise. It was really enjoyable and informative. So I'm definitely gonna look into your stuff even more.
Great stuff. Hang on just for a couple of minutes afterwards, and so we'll sign off on the podcast. So for everybody, thanks very much for listening, and thank you again, Simon and Daniel, and we're all done.